not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Welcome to the Devil in the Details podcast with your host, Will Nesbitt.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Devil in the Details podcast. I am your host, Will Nesbitt. Thank you for joining me today. Let's get into it. Imagine going to the doctor to be treated for a serious issue, believing you're going to receive the treatment and care that you need to get answers and relief. Then imagine that instead of treating the illness that you came in for, the doctors make you sicker, or is it more sick? They make you even more sick because they decided to secretly inject you with something as an experiment to see how that substance can be used to build a weapon. Sounds like a movie, right? Well, it's not. It's real. This is what happened to the person that we will be discussing today, Miss Janet Stadt. On March 9th, 1946, Janet Stadt was hospitalized at Strong Memorial Hospital, which is connected to the University of Rochester in New York. Now, Janet's a 41-year-old wife, mother, and hairdresser. And at the time, she was going in for issues with scleroderma. Now, scleroderma is basically it's an issue where it tightens or hardens the skin. Okay, it's a connective tissue disorder. And she wound up going to the hospital. She stayed for more than 11 weeks. Okay. And that also included seclusion in the metabolism ward. She was injected with plutonium without her consent and without her knowledge. So she goes home, she grows even more ill, and no one knows what's happening or what's wrong. And it wasn't until after she passed and her husband passed that in 1993, it came out that she had been one of the 18 people that were secretly experimented on by the U.S. government, all to help build the atomic bomb, which was spearheaded by Robert Oppenheimer. When we talk about the victims of these experiments, it's important for us to remember that these were real people. They were mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sons and daughters. They had dreams and ideas, and they had plans. and their lives were taken from them over greed and for the U.S. government's gain. Here today to help us understand who Janet was and more about her life and what she had to endure is her grandson, Jonathan Stadt. Let's welcome him now. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Will. Glad to be here.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about you and your background, and also tell us about your business, Flower City Pasta.
Well, I worked in construction, building Walmarts and Home Depots and Homewood Suites and stuff for about 30 years. And then when I was 52, I decided to leave the stress of the construction business. And I was out in Seattle for Thanksgiving a few years before that. And I was watching them throw the fish at the Pike Street Market. I turned around and I saw somebody selling artisanal dry flavored pasta. So I bought that from him for a couple of years and resold it, and then things kind of fell apart with him. And I got a Capitani extruder from Italy and started making pasta in my garage and handing it out to my neighbors and asking them what they thought. And eventually, I got to the point where I was pretty good at it, and I started selling it at Rochester Public Market and other markets around the Rochester area. And that was 20 years ago. I'm still making pasta.
Sounds like business is going well since you've been doing it as long as you have.
Yeah. Get a little better every year. And a pretty solid business. I had employees for a while, and I had a storefront for a while. And then about 5.5 years ago, my wife passed, and I kind of scaled it back, and I'm just do it myself. I'm kind of semi-retired, and I just do a couple markets and make pasta 3 or 4 days a week and sell it on weekends.
Janet Stadt is your grandmother. She was one of the 18 victims that the U.S. government chose to experiment on without consent during the race for Robert J. Oppenheimer to build the world's first atomic bomb. Tell us a little bit about your grandmother, who she was in her life up until the time of the tragic event.
She was a Russian Jew. Her family lived in Minsk, and she came over in the late 30s, getting away from the pogroms and stuff in Russia with her parents, and their last name was Joseph, and they were tailors in Rochester. They had a little tailor business. So my grandmother was always well dressed. They didn't have a lot of money. They were relatively poor, but they made clothes. So any pictures you see of my grandmother, my grandfather, she's always well dressed. And they lived in the city and had a small life. My grandfather just was a laborer. I don't even remember where, but he was a laborer, and he worked a lot. My dad was an only son, but he was born before the Manhattan Project stuff happened to my grandmother. And they were very poor. They lived in the city. My dad actually ran a trap line, trapped muskrats and stuff in a stream in the city, and that's how he made a little bit. They all chipped in. They all tried to make a little money. They were very poor. And my grandmother had scleroderma, which is her hands were very cramped up, so she didn't do a lot, although she knitted all the time that I remember. And she had a duodenal ulcer, which sent her to the University of Rochester Hospital. And nowadays that would be probably fixed with a medication or something, but it sent her to the hospital, and that's where they were running the experiments at the hospital. The hospital was being run by a general. I can't remember his name right now, but one of Oppenheimer's men, and they were looking for poor people or people that didn't have a lot of family. And they came into my grandmother's room and they said, "Hey, we'd like to give you a very special treatment and a private room," and so on and so forth. So she said, "Okay," and that's when it happened. It was before they dropped the bomb. They were trying to find out what plutonium did to bones, finding out what it did to people and what it did to bones. The big thing was they were studying bones. And so they injected my grandmother, and she got, actually, out of the 18 people, she got the largest dose, and she lived the longest because she was a tough little 5'2" woman. She had 5 or 6 different kinds of cancer in her life. Her family physician knew about it. They told him because they wanted to keep getting samples. And he said in court that he didn't tell her because he thought it wouldn't have changed anything in her mind or in her life, so he kept it secret. So my grandmother never knew. My grandfather never knew.
Now, do you know exactly what they did to her? Because I know with many of the other victims, all of them were injected with plutonium or other foreign substances, but some of them had teeth pulled, some of them had amputations. Do you have any of those details?
Yeah, there was a man that was a very poor man that was taken into the hospital, and he had like a lump on his knee or something, and it wasn't anything real bad or anything, but they told him it was cancer and that they would have to amputate. So they injected him with plutonium, they amputated his leg, and then they burned it in an incinerator, and they studied how much radiation was in it and so on and so forth. He was up there at the hospital for, I think, 30 or 40 days, and one night in the middle of the night, he got up, snuck out of the hospital, went home, put his wife in a car, and left town. And, Eileen Wilson tracked him down, the author of the Plutonium Files, but the hospital didn't know where he went.
Eb Cade, that's the gentleman's name that you're referring to. He was also one of the victims. I remember reading about him also in the Plutonium Files by Eileen Wilson, who I also had on the show a couple of times.
My grandmother went back to her home in the city of Rochester, and she was always sick. And my dad and his dad thought that she was a hypochondriac. They couldn't figure out why she was never well. And she just sat on the couch knitting, and neighbors brought over meals and stuff. And my dad, from a very young age, did all the vacuuming and all the sweeping and all the laundry and all the bed making and all that. And he grew up with a great deal of animosity towards his mother.
Did your grandparents suspect anything like this had happened? Did they have any sort of suspicions at all? Because it sounds like she was, growing more ill at a much more rapid pace than when she had gone into the hospital. So did they attribute that to what may have happened at the hospital?
They never put 2 and 2 together. They always just thought that for some reason she's sick and she was making it up. They always thought, I can remember, one of the last things they said was, why is she always sick all the time? She's just making it up. It's just in her head. And, it was not. And, the other thing that's crazy is we have a couple pictures of me, and I have 5 other siblings. We have pictures of us all cuddled around the couch with Grandma Stadt, and she was probably emitting radiation,
Right.
She probably would have set up a Geiger counter big time.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there cuddling with her because nobody ever knew.
Thinking about that and considering the possibilities, did you or your father or anyone else in your family think to get tested for radiation after you found out what happened with your grandmother?
No, we never did, because it was years and years after, during the Clinton administration, when Eileen Wellsome, the author, she was at the U of R studying that. She was an animal rights activist, and she was studying the tests they were doing on horses and beagles and stuff. And then she stumbled on like HM08 was my grandmother's science name in the experiment, and that was human material. And then she figured out that humans were involved. Then she FOIA'd the Clinton administration, and then the Clinton administration decided to come out with it and be public with it. It's kind of a gesture of, I don't know, a good gesture or keeping space between them and it or whatever. But she FOIA'd, and then Hazel O'Leary, who was Clinton's, I think, health person there, sent a huge file to. I got a huge box, and all the other people got a huge box of the file. My dad was going through a divorce from my mom at a time, and he didn't really have a permanent residence. And the file came to my house on a Saturday morning, and I was around, and I opened it up, and I could not understand. I couldn't comprehend. It was just so crazy. And I opened it up, and I didn't know, what the heck is going on here. And I happened to have a best friend that lived next door, Paul Newlands, and he's a tort attorney. So I carried the box over to his house, and he started looking at it, and he had a little more experience with those kind of records and stuff, and reading the legalese of it, and he started crying. And I was like, what the heck? What is this? And he said, your grandmother was a human radiation experiment. And he was like, I would really like to take your case and help you with this, but I'm on retainer for the U of R hospital. So
wow.
He gave us some names for some other attorneys that he knew. And then my dad, went out and kind of recruited these. I think there were 8 people in their lawsuit. And attorneys aren't allowed to go and try to find those people and get work. So my dad kind of contacted everyone from the list. And then they all did a group lawsuit. When they brought in the doctors and the Army personnel and other people from the hospital into the court proceedings, most of them said they did not know, and then other people said they were forced to do it, or the general said that the doctors that did the injecting said that if they didn't do it, they were going to be fired.
When we look at history, we see that a lot. We see a lot of, I was just doing my job as an excuse, like with the Nuremberg trials or any of the other doctors or scientists or military personnel who were interviewed for, giving their testimony during these types of trials. It was always, well, I was just doing my job. This is what they told me to do. And I just did it, blind loyalty.
I'm a vendor at the Syracuse market, and I had some friends there, some customers, and one of them was a professor at Syracuse University, and his wife was a professor at the nursing college, and she taught humanities. So I went and spoke at the humanities class, maybe 15 years ago or so, or maybe it was less than that. And then from there, she got me a keynote speaking event at the U of R. And I went and spoke at the U of R about my grandmother. And there were a couple of scientists slash doctors from the U of R that sat at the lecture, and then at the question and answer period, they spoke up and said, well, it was a really good thing because we learned so much about how to handle plutonium and how to clean up after that and what it did to people. So your grandmother did a really good thing. And I was just like livid. And I just said to them, oh, okay, well, how about if that was your grandmother? And I kind of did a mic drop. And Paul Nunes, my friend, that was the original attorney that saw it, he was there in the audience, and he got up and went down and basically threw those two guys out of the room. I don't know if they were plants or what, but there was also a U of R farmers market that I did during that period of time. And I had met the director of the U of R and all that, and was nice to him because I try to be nice to people. But another friend of mine that was a scientist there that was very much on my side about it, they said that they had 2 plutonium files books in the U of R medical library there. And every month or so, they would disappear. They wouldn't be in the library anymore. He had a whole case of plutonium files books that he had purchased on his own, and he would go in and fill the slot with 2 more plutonium file books whenever the shelf was empty.
I love it. I love it.
Going back to what you said about your friend, the attorney, who, when he saw the documentation about what had happened with the experiments on your grandmother, what was your family's response? Your father, you, your siblings, how did the family feel when they discovered what had happened with these experiments on your grandmother?
I was very sad, and my dad really, really just got so quiet and so sad about it. He very rarely spoke to the press or in public about it. But there was at the Democratic Chronicle, the paper that used to be in Rochester, there was a reporter, I think his name was Corydon Ireland, and he did a very, a weekly thing on it. And he interviewed me, and I was on TV and all that. And that was my 15 minutes of fame. But my dad was very withdrawn. I mean, he was like, to him, it was like his whole life was not real. His whole life he complained about his mom and all the work he had to do and that she was a hypochondriac, his whole life. And so he was just very, very, he was just withdrawn about the whole thing. And me and my siblings were just so sad. And it's just so much to try to comprehend, You think of the Henrietta Lacks story, and how that all went, but at least Henrietta Lacks lived.
Right. Right.
That reminds me of when I interviewed Elmarine Allen, who is the daughter of another one of the victims, Elmer Allen. He was also injected with plutonium, and they amputated his leg, and no one believed him either. Now, Mr. Allen, he actually suspected that something had been done to him. He had been telling people that they used him as a guinea pig. So he had those suspicions, and even though he was right, no one believed him, and no one even really considered it. Even his doctor, as you said, the same with your grandmother, his doctor basically had him classified as a schizophrenic, which, come to find out years later, his doctor had also been contacted by the U.S. Department of Energy and had been told to monitor him. So his doctor knew, but he lied to him. But Elmarine said that she had a lot of resentment towards her father, because, he had turned to alcoholism, he suffered from that. He, really couldn't work. And there was really essentially a burden on the family because they didn't understand. So she had a lot of resentment towards him until she discovered what had happened and then she understood. So it was similar to what you were just describing about your father and how he felt towards his mother.
Yeah, and my grandmother being a Russian Jew, I never even knew that she was Jewish. They had a house and they had a Jesus calendar up in the kitchen, and I can remember sitting at the dining room table and looking up when I was a little kid, and way back on the top of the hutch there was a menorah, and it was never talked about. It was never discussed. We never even knew until we did our research of our family much later. It was just something they had left Russia. They felt like they were in hiding. I think they didn't know. Are they going to be persecuted in the U.S.? They didn't know, so they never said anything. They didn't go out much. They were pretty much homebodies. And then one day she had to go to the hospital.
To go from one bad situation to another had to have been really difficult, to have to flee your homeland due to hardships there, and then only to come to the United States and face something like this. It's just unimaginable. And it's the same thing with a lot of the other victims too. The government agencies and the doctors, they take advantage of and prey on the poor and abuse them this way because the average person doesn't know anything about plutonium or even that secret experiment or that these types of experiments are even real or even happening, especially at that time because they take great efforts to conceal them. So for these people to go to the doctor trusting that they'll care for them and help them resolve whatever ailments and issues that they have, only to be taken advantage of in this way, in a horrific way, is a complete civil rights violation and a human rights violation. It's just downright evil.
I was at Christmas this year with my new family. I have a new lady that I'm out here in California with, and I was at Christmas with my new family with her, and somehow it came around and I told the story, and one of the guys was like, "Oh, come on, you're making that up. You're a great storyteller, but that could have never happened." And I'm like, "Well, he's one of these guys that has an AI. He can ask questions and get it verbally back on his phone. He pays like $10 a month for an AI helper or whatever you call it. I don't know." And I'm like, "Well, you got your phone right in your hand. Ask your AI companion." And he put the question in, and in like a millisecond, it came back with my grandmother's name and everything, and he was just like beside himself. Because people just don't believe it.
Yeah, because people believe that this type of thing does not happen. Many people don't know it happens. A lot of people don't think it'll happen to them. And then you have others who don't even believe it's real at all. They think, this type of thing could never happen to me or, didn't happen to anyone like you experienced with that guy in the audience at your lecture that time. So people are really naive and think, well, the government wouldn't do that. And that's just not the case. There are far too many examples of this type of thing happening. It has happened and it's still happening and it will continue to happen unless people are warned and unless there are specific safeguards and sanctions that are clearly and consistently enforced by our government and watchdog agencies, that can keep tabs on this type of thing and blow the whistle on it when it happens, and maybe prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I flew the American flag outside my front porch for a long, long time. And the day that I got that box from the government, I took the flag down and I've never flown it since.
Have you talked to or met with any of the other victims' families, or do you keep in contact with any of them?
Yeah, I'm so terrible with names. When I did the keynote speech, we had Eileen was there, and another one of the victims' sons was there that my dad was close with and had coffee with and stuff. So I met a couple of the other surviving family members, and it was the same stories. Unbelievable, very hurt by it. We lost faith in our federal government, so on and so forth. Another thing, Will, that was an unanswered question for a long time, but when I went through the box preparing to meet with you, the question was answered, was when my dad was preparing his case, the lawyers came up with a heavily redacted piece of paper that had said that my grandmother's body was exhumed from the Mount Hope Cemetery where she was buried, and that is the same cemetery that Frederick Douglass is in, and Susan B. Anthony is in that cemetery. So the lawyers came to my dad and said, "We think that your mother's body is not in her grave." And my dad said, "Well, I've always thought that she was there, and I've always gone and visited her there. And does it matter to my case whether we know or not?" Because they were going to go and dig up the gravesite. And he said, "I don't really even want to know." So they didn't do that. So recently, when I was going back through the files and just refreshing my memory for my talk with you, I found an unredacted piece of paper that said that her body was exhumed from her grave because they wanted to study the bones.
That is truly horrible and evil at that. I remember in my conversation with El Marine, she was telling me that her and her brother had a fear of that happening to their father. So they took the safeguards of when they buried him, he's encased in steel. And then on top of that, there's concrete. And then on top of that is granite. So it would be very difficult for them to exhume his body. But they still have his leg that they amputated. They still have it in a lab somewhere, and they're still studying it. So I don't see where they would have the need to exhume him because they have that. But, it just adds another layer of evil to, to what they've already done. Now, the government hearings, the committee hearings that they held, did you attend those? Did you and your father attend those?
No, we didn't attend any of those. Did not.
Knowing what we know now, what do you think could have been done differently, or that you think we could do differently to prevent these types of experiments from harming people?
Boy, I wish I knew. And in my mind is that it continued to happen, and it's happening today, whatever it is. I just don't have any faith in our I would say, I guess you could say, federal government, society. I just don't have any faith at all that this isn't going on for some other experiment, for some other thing, up to this day.
Yeah.
Because we had stuff in the records that showed into the late 80s and early 90s that they were still studying the bones.
Your grandmother's doctor, you said that the Department of Energy had approached him about keeping tabs on your grandmother and that he knew what had happened. What ever happened to him after everything came out?
He passed away and took it with him to his grave. He never told her anything. He passed away. He never, there was never an apology or anything like that.
What was your grandfather's stance on everything? Was he just kind of in the frame of mind of taking care of your grandmother to make sure she had, the best life possible in spite of her illness?
Yeah, he was gone before they knew. He died before my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just another hardworking guy that was trying to, working overtime and trying to make enough money to make ends meet in their little household. Because she could never work. But she was a hairdresser for a while, but that was, that was before she was injected.
Aside from the experiments, what do you remember about your grandmother, and what would you like others to know and remember about your grandmother?
My dad and my grandparents had a falling out. We didn't see him much, but I'm the oldest of my siblings, and so I went up to the Adirondacks with them once with my grandmother and grandfather. I used to sleep over every once in a while, and I just remember that they were just so sweet and so kind to me. And I just had a birthday a few days ago, and I like to have chocolate pie for my birthday. And I think that all started because whenever I went over there, they would always get out one of those Rich's frozen chocolate pies for me. And we always had chocolate pie at my grandparents' house. And she just sat on the couch and knitted afghans and stuff. We still have one. And I do remember the smell of anise candy. She had a candy dish with those anise candies. And when I went to do the speech at the nursing school in Syracuse, and when I went to do the speech at the U of R, you can buy in like the old vintage candy section of the store, you can buy anise candy. So I always hand those out so that people smell the memory of what I smell in my memory.
And what about your siblings? Do they also give talks and lectures on the experiments, or are you pretty much the official spokesperson for the family?
Being the eldest, I'm kind of the one that unfortunately does these things. My sister Kara is a much better record keeper. She keeps all the family records and stuff. She's 8 years younger than me, and then my sister Barb is 2 years younger than me, and she's, they talk to other family members about it and stuff.
Okay.
Now my love of the smell of anise has transferred over to absinthe.
Oh.
So I occasionally have a half a shot of absinthe, and some people don't like it because it smells so much like licorice.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So what's next for you? What do you have planned personally, professionally, with your business? What do you have coming up? What projects are you working on?
Well, my lady son moved out here to San Diego, I think 22 years ago, and she has a 6 and 8-year-old grandchild out here. We flew out for 2 Thanksgivings and spent like 4 or 5 days. I just felt like that wasn't enough. So when I floated the idea to her to come out here for the winter and try to establish a farmer's market out here, it took about 10 seconds to convince her to come out here. So we towed a trailer out here, and we're set up at a really nice little RV place in the desert out here in Lakeside, California, and we're just enjoying it and trying to build up a little extra business that maybe her son will take over when we go back. It's kind of expensive to live out here. And her son and daughter-in-law are both teachers, and they could use a little extra something.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to meet with me and giving us information on your grandmother, helping us to get to know her on a more personal level, on a more human level, and letting us see who she was, and not just as a victim, but as a person. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm going to turn it around and go out and have a great day in the sunshine, and just want to say peace and love to all.
Well, hopefully we can have you back on again sometime soon. So thank you again, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Will, and I'll hear from you soon, I hope.
Well, that's today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Jonathan Stadt, for giving us his time today and for sharing information about his grandmother and the trials and tribulations that she had to endure, unfortunately. Be sure to join us for our next episode. Make sure that you are subscribed to my Spotify as well as YouTube so you can receive notifications when the episodes drop. You can find this as well as other episodes, which I do encourage you to go back and watch. If you go to my Linktree, that's Linktree, that's linktr.ee/will to live US. You'll find the link below, and you can find that as well as all of my social media pages. You'll find articles as well as links to other resources that you can check out. Please consider donating to the podcast so that I can continue to bring you wonderful guests, new information. I have a lot of ideas, things that I want to do to expand the podcast and grow it, and draw attention to these types of issues that have not only happened in the past, but are currently still happening today. Email me. My email, you can message me also on my Linktree. Again, that's linktr.ee/will to live US, WILLTOLIVEUS. Thanks again for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you all again on the next episode. Take care. Peace.